So welcome to the call. Welcome to our roundtable. This is one of my dream roundtables. We have so many perspectives and so many sets of experiences. We have Trudy Goodwin, who I affectionately call, and many of us call Mama True, who was an organizer with the Black Panther Party and organizes now with the Los Angeles Community Action Network, spent her life in the work of Black liberation. So welcome to the call, Mama True.
Thank you. Thank you.
Joining us back at the round table is Aqeela Sherrills, who's one of my best friends in the world, who does work on building peace in communities, work in Newark, work in Los Angeles, but also work nationally, redefining public safety. Yes. And we also have my spirit nephew, who I've adopted. I hope that's okay, Matthew.
That's all good with me.
Matthew is an organizer with March for Our Lives, with the Black Lives Matter Youth Vanguard. He's a freshman at California State University, Northridge, and one of the best human beings I know. And so we're going to get into this conversation around gun violence, gun safety, and gun control. But we're complicating the conversation because we're talking about it from a Black perspective. So we hear, kind of a liberal casting of why we need gun control, why we need gun safety, why we need to address gun violence. But a lot of that omits the history of Black people and neglects the history of Black people and experiences of Black people, especially in this country. And so one of the things that often comes up for me is that the state has never been a source of safety for Black folks. So the concept of self-defense and the practice of Black self-defense has been core to our survival and also to our quest for Black freedom. And so we can go all the way back, right, to Mama Harriet having to arm herself and others as we took our own freedom, right? We can think about, the securing of Black towns like Rosewood, like Tulsa, right? We can think about the Deacons for Defense. We can think about theorists and practitioners like Robert F. Williams, and who most people, the group most people will be familiar with is the Black Panther Party for self-defense, right?
That's right.
Mama Trudy, you were a member of the Black Panther Party for self-defense.
Right.
Can you help us to kind of understand why there needs to be a Black approach to our own self-defense, and why the Black Panther Party at the same time they were pushing back against police brutality, also talked about securing Black communities and arming ourselves?
That's right, absolutely. And I think that, I'm glad that you brought up Robert Williams, because it's through the Black armed guards that the Panther Party came up with the idea of self-defense. They looked at Robert Williams' work and saw how he was protecting the people in Alabama and realized that this was something that we needed in California, if not across the nation. The Panthers started out with believing that the only way that they were going to be able to protect themselves and their community was if they stood up against police brutality and against vigilantism with guns, and saying, if a police officer was to stop a young man, the Panthers would go out on the corner with their guns, instructing that person that had been stopped about what their rights were and what they didn't have to do. And the whole time making their presence known to the police department so that they would know that their guns were trained on them as the police were training their guns on the people that they stopped. And that actually was so successful, Melina, that the state ended up passing a law that controlled whether or not folks in California could carry weapons out in the open.
Because prior to the Panthers, you couldn't carry a concealed weapon.
Right.
But there's a loophole in the law. It doesn't say anything about unconcealed weapons.
Right.
And so the Panthers used the law to benefit them and to benefit our community and to say, let's be armed.
Right. Right.
Right.
Absolutely.
In a posturing, though, of self-defense. And I think that's an important distinction, because when we think about Robert F. Williams, right, he actually, there was a rift in the NAACP. Robert F. Williams was a leader of in the NAACP.
Right.
But because of white terrorism in black communities, he was about black people being able to defend ourselves, right? And so it wasn't about arming ourselves for the sake of aggression.
Right.
It's about defending our communities. So can you just kind of underscore that distinction a bit?
Absolutely. You know, and I think it's really important that we do that, because over the decades, the Panthers have been painted with this broad brush of being violent and wanting to murder non-black people. And nothing could have been further from the truth. What they were saying was that our community was under attack by whites, predominantly white police. And what they wanted to do was to make sure that our youth and our brothers and sisters were safe when they went out on the street. And by setting up this party of self-defense, they were working on the side of black folks to make sure that when they went out in the street, if the police did stop them, at least they had someone there to protect them. And it's very much like Robert Williams, because he was doing the exact same thing. It was like he saw where blacks were being attacked and band together these 50 to 60 people to protect the people in Alabama.
Right. There's a brilliant book on the concept of black self-defense by Akinyele Umoja called We Will Shoot Back.
That's right.
That talks about this whole history. I caught myself reading it on the plane one time, and the white person next to me was looking at me, and I was like, oh, maybe this is not good plane reading. Let me put this away, right? But we hope everybody who watches the call will get that book, We Will Shoot Back by Akinyele Umoja. What do you think about the concept of armed self-defense now? And this is really for all of us. Let's start with this. What do you think about gun ownership, and do you own a gun?
Want me to go first?
Sure.
So obviously I don't own a gun. But
Why?
I'm too young. Well,
Oh, is it 21 or 18?
it's definitely not 18. I know that.
I think you can own a rifle at 18, but a handgun at 21, I think.
That's actually ridiculous. But I don't see anything wrong with owning a gun. I just feel like just being responsible and knowing like what you need a gun for. Like no one in their right mind needs an assault rifle, right?
Right.
So the thing is though, like you said, black people, the state has never been like working for black people. It's always been something we've been fighting against because they've done so many like horrendous things in the past. So I don't see anything wrong with owning a gun. It's just being smart about it and knowing that there is a problem with gun violence in this country.
And that's really interesting for you to say, because you're with March for Our Lives, right? And so when we think about March for Our Lives and the kids who came out of the mass shooting in Parkland, Florida, and this whole youth movement around gun safety, there's kind of a mainstream conversation and narrative about, you know, nobody should own a gun, right? But you're pointing out this tension though. Well, what about black people? Right? We kind of can't depend on anybody else to protect us but us, right? So has that conversation emerged in your circles?
For sure. Because the whole thing is, I don't want anybody to think like March for Our Lives is trying to just get away, like all guns have to go away. That's never been the plan. It's always been about just being smart about the guns you own, and again, like recognizing that there's a huge problem with gun violence in this country. But yeah, there's never been a problem with people owning guns. It's just, and like we understand, like I've had conversations with a lot of people from National and like all that stuff from March for Our Lives, and they understand what the state has done to Black people before, and they understand why a lot of Black people would feel that need. So it's not.
I do want to get back to that as we kind of move this conversation forward, because something is happening in your movement that I told you before we started filming that I think is different in our generations, right? Around the kinds of conversations that you're able to have within the movement between Black folks and non-Black folks, and the responsiveness to the Black perspective on these issues. So I want to hold on to that so we can talk about that. It's really encouraging to me what's happening within your movement. What about you, Aqeela?
Yeah, I own guns. I ain't giving up my guns. I have a rifle, I have a couple of handguns, and I am a big believer in the Second Amendment because exactly what Matthew was saying and what Mama True was saying. You know, we have had the experience of watching COINTELPRO destroy Black folks just because they were standing up to defend themselves against excessive, police, force. And so the work that I do around redefining public safety, which is training non-traditional leaders to be public safety professionals, is essentially about getting rid of police in our neighborhood, right? Because I'm like, first of all, the Black and brown community should be the safest communities in the country, right? And so if we stand up and learn, public safety protocol and policy and the standard operating procedures, I think that, and that's what our whole strategy is, that we decrease the need for police in our neighborhood. And I was at an event a couple of years ago in Newark, in which the representative from Patterson, Black Lives Matter representative from Patterson, was speaking on a panel, and he said that our goal is to rid our community from police like 100%, and people chuckled and laughed in the audience. But but then when he came back and qualified it, because in the city of Newark, right, 80% of the residents of the area out of all those districts experience no violence, no gun violence.
Yes.
What about you?
I totally, that is exactly the way that I feel. And we are not alone. What statistics are showing now is that Black folks are purchasing guns at a rate of 20% over white gun purchases. So that's telling you that Black folks in this country do not feel safe. And I'm constantly telling my neighbors, every time I see on TV where they're having a gun buyback, it's like, do not give up your weapon. Right. Let them go out there and buy back the guns from the people in the valley. They only do the
buybacks in our neighborhoods.
Exactly,
right?
Exactly. So I own guns, and I was trained to fire and clean and put back together guns when I was in the Panther Party. And from little, I have been taught that this is a way of making sure that no one takes advantage of me.
Do you think that there's a concerted effort to keep Black folks from having guns?
Many of our social activists, allies, and friends lost their rights to have a gun just because they were involved in a social action where they sat down in the middle of the street, or they took out some chalk to write a message. They lost their rights to carry guns, or to receive a gun permit. The other thing is, I don't know of any Black folks whose family didn't originate out of the South.
Right.
If you come in from the South, you were raised around guns. My great-grandmother at 93 saved my little 5-year-old life running across the field with dogs, wild dogs chasing me. Got up out of her bed, grabbed her shotgun, shot off one in the air, and the dogs left me alone. So we grew up understanding the necessity of guns.
The thing is that the majority of folks like say in terms of urban violence and gun injury, the majority of those folks ain't going into no store and buying no gun and getting no permit. So the majority of folks in the neighborhood don't go to get permits. And so they'll never be able to count like who has a gun and who don't have a gun.
That's a good point.
And so I'm like, you know, I'm not advocating for illegally purchasing guns, but I'm like, get your gun, you know, by any means necessary.